Okay, there's a couple of people that I haven't been in touch with that I said I would be in touch with, but I've been pretty busy at the moment. I had a voiceover audition today for someone that sounds like a rat, but an Australian rat. So that was a bit hard. A Yank rat I could handle, but an Australian rat, yeah, they're a bit different. So, okay, the next chapter, I'm living with Glen. We've been together 7 days and I'm running out of money. And on the fifth night with Glen, Johnny Bates and a speed freak poet called Caveman happened to come by, and they had nowhere to stay, so we let them sleep on the floor. Glen was happy to give them carpet space, and I wasn't keen, but she convinced me to be generous because she was a nice girl. And the four of us talked on until 1 a.m. And then we put out the light and slept. Around 3 a.m. I woke up in the dark and I snuggled close to Glen because we're on a single bed, you know, that's how we liked each other. You know, you've got to like the other person to sleep in a single bed with them. Give me a break. There were a lot of single beds in hippie pads because we couldn't afford a double bedroom half the time. So at 3 a.m. I woke up in the dark and I snuggled close to Glen and something crept along my leg. I thought it was a spider, so I flicked it away, but it came back a few minutes later and I thought, could it be a hand? And then I realised someone was trying to cop a feel. Now I knew it wasn't Johnny Bates, because he drinks so much during the day that he never wakes up at night. It had to be Caveman. The hand crept up towards my groin. Now, Caveman obviously thinks that Glen is on his side of the bed. But I was on that side of the bed because we must have changed over in the dark. Yeah, the hand felt its way up. I gave a little female moan of pleasure because female moans are a bit different than male moans. That was the first acting lesson I ever had, come to think of it, acting like I was a girl, giving a moan. Yeah. So that may have led to me becoming an actor. Yeah. You never know what one thing can lead to. I engaged his fingers and I drew them up to my lips and I went, and I laid the hand on my thigh. Now, behind the bed, I kept a cricket stump in case I met a burglar. I'd be ready and folks would think me heroic when I chased them off, but I'd not ever had a chance to use it. My left hand held Caveman's fingers and my right hand swung the stump in the darkness. Ah! Caveman gave a yelp of pain, but then stifled it. And I could hear him go, oh, oh, oh. And he never ventured again. Well, not as far as I know. In the morning, Caveman had a sore hand. But we didn't say anything about it because he might have thought that Glen had hit him, for all I know. So Caveman lived with his mum in Balmain, but occasionally he stayed in a cave near Hawkesbury River Bridge. 4 years later, he died. Richard Coe, who had a pet python, he told me Caveman took too much methadone for too long. Now, methadone was a tablet form of methamphetamine that you could get legally before 1972 if you were a fat person. Yeah, doctors used to give methamphetamine out to fat people before 1972. That's how good it was in those days, the drug laws. But in 1972, they made everything hard to get, and therefore criminals took control of the drug trade. Before that, you could go to a doctor and get what you wanted if you had a good enough reason. All right, so up until 1972, things were pretty good for drug users. Longhead Billy told me, caveman, I saw him in hospital before he carked it. His guts went to his heart, and his heart went to his guts. Now, I'm sure that the death certificate never said those words, but from then on, I never took more than one methadone tablet at a time. But I didn't like drugs back then. The landlord was clamouring for rent, so I headed for the Royal George. Sooner or later, some tourist will give me $10 to buy drinks, and I'll pretend to get them and piss off with the dough. I'll run out the back door and run back here and pay the rent so Glen and I can stay in bed for another week. And it played out exactly as planned. God bless the Royal George. Love had me in ecstasy, and Glen seemed happy. On our 7th night, someone gave us a couple of methadone tablets, and we talked all night for 2 days about 100 different subjects. And Glen told me that her friend in Melbourne was hippie identity Adrian Rawlins. Now, as far as I know, Adrian Rawlins was gay, but maybe he was bisexual, because Glen said he's into jazz poetry and I really love being with him. And she said, I'm getting tonight's train home, Kaz. I love you with my soul, but my body needs Adrian. Even though I sometimes suspect he's a bit puffy. I'm sorry, she said. At the train station, we tearfully said farewell. We were really crying in each other's arms. And she gave me advice. She said, don't take methadone, Kaz. You're much nicer without it. At the Royal George, I went to the Royal George pub and I hid my tears. If there was a chance to win Glen back, I'd have gone to Melbourne. But I ran into beatnik poet Sheldon Lee, who described Adrian Rawlins in such a groovy light that I felt unable to compete. I cried for 2 days and then got over it. Years later, I heard that Glen was in a nut house, but so were many of my friends. So I thought it was no big deal because they usually came out after 2 weeks. And it was usually just to get off drugs. Now, the Ball Pants was in a laneway off of Victoria Street, and it was the best and the cheapest hippie coffee lounge. It had live blues and folk music, but I thought it was too much watched by the cops, so I stayed away. I was afraid of getting another 6 months for vagrancy. So down in Liverpool Street, near Woomerah Avenue, was the Hungry Eye. That became my favourite. The clientele was a mixture of lesbians, crims and beatniks. The 3 groups didn't mix much, but there was mutual respect and an atmosphere of lovable, pleasant degeneracy. I'm practicing my rat voice now. You could go to sleep in it, but the rule was that you had to remain sitting and not actually lay down. Upstairs was a private room where lesbians could cuddle. In 1967, it was one of the few coffee houses open all night until 8 a.m. Out the back was a big room with a jukebox where cats could dance, and a side door led to an alley for going out and smoking pot, because they told you not to smoke pot inside the joint in case the cops came. It was there that I met the chick I had prayed for. The night was hot, and the hungry-eyed there was hardly room to move. An irreverent young woman with short blonde hair bopped in from nowhere and was asking, "Can anyone here score acid?" Now, I knew nothing about LSD or any drug. I was high on my beat lifestyle. But after reading Kerouac's novel, On the Road, I had sworn to answer any question by saying yes. This is what I considered. I forgot to talk like a rat. Okay. This is what I considered as being positive. The girl was asking people, "Who can help me score?" I was enigmatic, and people considered me in the know, although I knew very, very little. But my eye droops from an accident, so everybody sitting on that side of the room must have always thought that I was stoned. And I'm a bit light sensitive, so people sitting on this side of the room might have thought my eye was droopy from drugs. So everybody thought that I was on drugs. So all the drug users thought that I knew where to score. But I knew absolutely fuck all about drugs. But somebody pointed me out to the girl, and as a gold mine of drug knowledge. So she asked I forgot to talk like a rat. I got to practice talking like a rat. So she asked me with a smile if I could get some LSD, and I replied in the affirmative. She dragged me outside to an alley, and she cracked an ampule of amyl nitrate, the 60s version of Rush. She shoved it under my nose and she said, "Sniff this." The inhalant caused uncontrollable laughter, gut-centered laughter. Well, it was controllable, but if you weren't worried about who was watching, it was caused about 30 seconds of uncontrollable gut-centered laughter. Now, I had sworn never to touch drugs, but fate had led me to this substance, not me. So I did not betray my Zen law. I'd only taken a sniff as a means to get the girl. Ideas like this allowed me to justify any dodgy action that entered my field of vision for the next 5 years. Leslie was her name, and she was called Mindless by a few friends because it was sort of like satire, because she went to university and she was very intelligent, very, very intelligent. So she used to encourage people to call her mindless, because mindless was a state in Zen where you had no mind. So, she was happy to be called mindless. So she'd been sent by her parents to see a psychiatrist who was part of the therapy, and to get her to communicate, injected her intravenously with glass ampules of liquid methamphetamine, methadone. And she raved on in the coffee shop. She said, "It's the purest central nervous system stimulant known. I dug it, so I raced down to the university library and studied the symptoms one needed to show for prescribers to use it on me again. I made sure I showed behaviours that would lead them to give me more. My psychiatrist thinks he's a genius who's rooted out my problems, and my parents are happy at my progress." The methadone rid Leslie of inhibitions, opened her defences, and strengthened her ability to communicate. That was what it did mostly. That's why doctors gave it to people in nut houses, to encourage them to communicate. With this newfound energy and to fully experience chemical changes, she was undertaking an intense exploration of psychedelic drugs. She dragged me out and we scoured the cross. We scoured King's Cross seeking LSD. In coffee shops and bars, we both tried to sniff out someone with acid, and we never found any that night. And then she took me to the south side cliff top of Bondi Beach when we got worn out, where we cuddled until sunrise. And she left me at 5 a.m. to get a taxi back to her Randwick home. Exhilarated, I went back to 98 Hargrave Street, where that was the place I'd just moved into. It was full of it was the best hippie house of all. 98 Hargrave Street, Paddington. I'll tell you about that later. And I lay awake smiling. Wow, she can afford to get taxis. I'm gonna get that groovy chick. A few nights later, she took me to a sparsely furnished house in Woomerah that seemed to be empty, but she had the key. And she squatted Buddha-like on the bare board floor. She rolled fat joints, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd had puffs of pot before, but wasn't impressed. The odour it gave out smelt like human shit. I thought, that must be why they call it shit. Then the weed stretched my mind. Until that moment, I'd never had a perceptive look at myself. The grass took me to a state of immense introspection. I could hear Leslie raving on about extremely important subjects. Potheads used to describe the incessant speech as rabbiting. But what I heard coming from her was a Zen mistress-style description of my fears, my faults and hypocrisies and my limitations. I saw the worst of myself. And as the night wore on, Leslie became a jury, Jury, consisting of all my hippie friends. It dawned on me that this was my initiation ceremony. The whole of the Sydney push had gathered in a deserted Woomerah terrace house to judge me. Behind the wall in the next room, they'd consider if I should be admitted into the great holy disorder of the push. I strained my ears to catch them discussing my shortcomings. Acting as my own defence lawyer, I yelled through the wall, "You are correct in many ways. However, some of the charges against me are not right. You have misunderstood slightly. My motivations are good. My heart is pure. I am worthy to be one of your group. Far out am I, and I can talk like E. Cummings, the Weird Cat poet. I deserve reverence unto the lyrics and drink the wine, WHINE, of Bob Dylan, rock and folk, and I deserve to be accepted as I accept you. I rest my case." I prepared for their next examination. An hour passed. No further courtroom procedure happened. But they must still be there, waiting for me to prove why I was worthy. So it was up to me. I gave further oration. Judge me if I am not quite like you. It is my Zen sense of humour that you have not had time yet to dig. I will explain. I justified myself for another hour, then waited for the verdict. There was no one there, of course, and Leslie had gone looking for a cheesecake shop because she used to get hungry quite a lot. But in my mind, she was next door with the jury. Anyway, I'll tell you what happens next tomorrow. That's why it was good to have a religious upbringing, because every now and again you go through this self-judgment sort of stuff. So it was kind of good for me.